Major Lindsey and Africa presents Bouncing Back, conversations about resilience for lawyers.
Welcome to Bouncing Back, Resilience for Lawyers. This podcast is brought to you by Major, Lindsey, and Africa, the global leader in legal search and consulting. I'm your host, Rebecca Glatzer. I'm a managing director in the Associate Practice Group at Major, Lindsey, and Africa. In this podcast, I'll speak to successful professionals about the hiccups, bumps, bruises, and setbacks they've experienced in their personal and professional lives, and how they ultimately bounce back to flourish. Today, my guest is Jonathan Olinger. Jonathan is a vice president and senior associate general counsel at Global Payments, a financial technology services company headquartered in Atlanta. At Global Payments, Jonathan leads the enterprise-wide vendor legal team. Among other things, Jonathan is responsible for technology licensing agreements and providing intellectual property counseling regarding patent and trade secret issues. Prior to joining Global Payments, Jonathan was an intellectual property litigation attorney at several firms in Atlanta. Jonathan holds a BS in aerospace engineering from the Georgia Institute of Technology and earned his JD from Stanford Law School. First of all, welcome, Jonathan. I want to get right into it. Your first and second years of law school were what I would describe as life-altering. Tell me what happened.
I think law school is life-altering for pretty much everybody, especially those first and second years. But yeah, no, my law school experience was fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed Stanford, but I kind of had two pretty defining life experiences during law school. The first was that during my first year of law school, I started the coming out process to friends and eventually family. And, it's always a tumultuous process for anybody when it's a part of their coming out. I was very fortunate in that it was a very positive coming out experience, but the stress of coming out is very real no matter how positive the reactions may be. Also in the spring of my first year of law school, I received some pretty terrible news in that my mom received a terminal cancer diagnosis. From the very beginning, I was a mama's boy, and to have your hero, your partner, your best friend receive a terminal diagnosis like that was pretty devastating. And I received that the spring of my first year of law school, and then by October of my second year of law school, my mom had passed away. Tumultuous and eventful and life-altering are some pretty apt terms to describe those first couple of years of law school.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine. I know I've told you this before. I went to law school. That is also a traumatic experience for some of us. I think it was a little traumatic for me. And I've lost a parent, and I've also come out about my sexual orientation to friends and family. And, that in and of itself, and, for me, that was the thing that happened first. I came out in college, and, it's a process, for the uninitiated. It's not like you come out, snap your fingers, and that process is over, right? You are, slowly but surely sort of tiptoeing your way out of the closet. You're, picking initial people, at least I did, who I felt would be safe, that I knew kind of their stance on homosexuality, and I knew that they would be accepting to me based on their behaviors in the past. And I started there, right? And then you kind of take a little breath and you go, okay, that went okay. And then you slowly venture out and you think of another couple of people, who you think will be okay with it. And it's really a lifelong experience. And so I'm curious to just talk about that one piece.
Sure.
You started law school, and then you came out. Who did you come out to first? Was it your brother, or was it friends?
It was friends. It was friends in law school. I think in some ways I'm not ashamed to say it, but I think the truth of the matter is, I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky, went to undergrad in Georgia, and one of my clear intentions in the law school application process was to get out of the South.
Yes.
I felt that this was going to be part of my journey, and I didn't know when it was going to happen, but I knew it was going to happen eventually. And so I wanted to get to a place where I didn't feel kind of encumbered or burdened by the the stereotypes of the Southern way of life, for lack of a better phrase.
Yeah. Yes.
And so, I made the choice to go to Stanford in large part because I knew this was going to be part of my story. I wanted to be in a more progressive, more accepting environment. And so getting to law school, I found that. And I found a wide group of friends and classmates that fully accepted me for who I was. And so the coming out process to them was very easy.
Yes.
And in some ways, it wasn't necessarily a coming out process, right? Because they didn't know me. They didn't have the preconceived notions. It was just me telling my story on my own terms. It was great. And then I also was fortunate to have a couple of college classmates that were at Stanford with me. They were pursuing their PhDs while I was pursuing my JD program. And they were the next people that I came out to. And again, blown away by the positive response. But like you said, it's not as though it's like a coming out event. It is a series of events, and it's a never-ending series of events, right? It's just the nature, tenor, and length of the conversation is what changes over time.
So it's great that you have had this sort of group of core group of friends who you were physically close to and emotionally close to that could be your supportive backbone if it didn't go well. And then you went away, kind of physically distance yourself, figuratively and actually distance yourself from, the Southeast, where religion is prevalent and, people are not necessarily, at least stereotypically, as open-minded, seemingly. And I did a similar thing where I came out to my parents and then I just disappeared. I had a scheduled trip to LA for 2 weeks and I just left. I dropped that bomb and I went to the other coast. So
the ultimate mic drop moment.
That's right. I didn't do it for 3 years, but I was like, I got to get away. I'm gonna let you simmer on that, and I'll come back when the feelings have died down or you've kind of wrapped your head around this idea, parents. But I also did the same thing too, where I created this safety net of friends who were like, we've got your back no matter what happens with your parents or other loved ones, your family, you're good. So this is a common theme. These are common themes and common things that happen amongst people who are LGBTQ and coming out, midlife. So the friend thing went well, and then you told your brother next. You have one sibling. You just have the one brother.
Yeah, I just have one brother, and he lives here in Atlanta, Georgia, as well. And my first summer, I came back to Atlanta to work at a law firm in town and was staying with my brother. And, it took pretty much the entire summer to build up the courage to have that coming out conversation with him. But I'm very fortunate to have a brother that is beyond understanding and supportive. And so it's a positive conversation as well. And, it was great to be able to have that conversation with my brother, knowing that my parents were at the time dealing with such an extreme trauma of my mom's illness and eventual passing. And, I went through lots of turmoil and saying, is this a conversation, is a coming out conversation one that I can have with them right now? Or is it just unnecessary stress to add to their lives at this moment? Because it's going so well for me, I feel safe. I can hold on to this for a little bit longer if it's going to avoid making what's a difficult time even more difficult.
From a timing perspective, so you come home summer, first year summer, you do summer courtship thing, you tell your bro, it goes well. When did you find out about, I know this has been a sort of a recurring thing in your life in terms of your mother's illness, but when did you find out about this sort of next bout of cancer? Was it that summer as well?
No, I think it was, if I remember correctly, I want to say it was kind of like May that I found out that the cancer had spread to her brain and had become terminal. And of course, Stanford at the time was on a very extended, a different schedule from the rest of the nation. So I didn't start my summer associate until kind of mid-June at that point. So found out May, went home for a week, started my summer associate clerkship experience. Went back home for a week at the end of the summer, and the deterioration was pretty aggressive at that point in my mom's health. And then so went back to school at Stanford, I think September. Went back early for that the the 2L interview process that, is stressful enough in and of itself. And by October, it was kind of in the thick of that, in the thick of the interview process, going to firms for the interviews. And we'll never forget was, at Stanford, had an interview with a firm, an all-day interview with a firm in San Francisco. It started like 10 o'clock. And as I'm on the road, about to get onto the highway to go to San Francisco, I get a call from my dad, pull over, and he tells me my mom had passed.
God.
And, let me say, I get the call from my dad, he told me my mom had passed, and then I pull over because I'm like, I can't drive right now.
Yeah.
It's just such a wild experience.
Yeah, well, and, we don't like to talk about this, but at the end of the day, every child has their favorite parent and every parent has their favorite child. It's a very faux pas thing. I am very much a daddy's girl. And, so, being the mama's boy, I'm sure it was just earth shattering, for me, it was earth shattering, and I can't imagine. What did you do? I mean, you pulled over, I'm sure you were sobbing, and bereft. What can you remember what happened in the ensuing minutes and hours after that?
I remember that the first thing that I did was turn around, drive home, and email the partner that had set up my interview schedule to say, hey, I'm not coming for interviews today. My mom just passed away. Sorry, I'll reach out to you to reschedule, right? Which was just one of those, I think anybody that loses a parent, there's always or anybody that experiences that, there's always kind of this moment where you're so detached from the grief that you're autopilot, and you're just let me do these three things so that I can then completely and totally lose it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was the very first thing that I did. I was so concerned about making sure I didn't leave a bad impression on the law firm, even though my mom just passed away, that I goofily just had to cancel that interview. And then proceeded to kind of break down and started reaching out to my close friends who'd been with me through the process of my mom's deteriorating health, and then called them over to hey, I need somebody because I'm thousands of miles away from my family and I am thoroughly grieving right now.
Yeah. And, I can't help but sort of point out this sort of irony, I don't know if maybe that's the right word, of our industry is such an interesting one, right? Where, it's beat into you, don't miss an OCI interview. Don't be on your interview. Your life depends on what happens your second summer. I'm sure all of this dialogue was sort of going through your head because it's a universal thing for law school students that this is, your life and your success in the industry hinges on what happens 2L summer, and if it goes poorly, you are going to be a failure. I mean, this is the drumbeat that you get from year one on. And so I also can't imagine, it's your mother dies, you've been sort of, I'm sure, probably doing some pre-grief, I would imagine, if you're anything like me. My father had a protracted illness too, right? So you have these moments where you're I know this is happening and I can't believe it's happening, and various versions of acceptance or non-acceptance, and then it happens, boom, and it's coming, but it's still shocking, right? When it happens.
No, I was fortunate enough. One of my good friends from college, her father was a pilot for Delta. And she had, her family had a number of kind of buddy passes they get to utilize. For those that don't know, Delta Buddy Pass is just kind of, a free ticket that you can utilize for a limited number of family members in a year. And so she was gracious enough. She knew that my mom was not doing well. She was gracious enough to give me a buddy pass to use to go visit my mom. So I flew out the week before she passed. I got to spend a weekend with her. My brother drove up and we got to spend some time with her. And, it was very much this is the last visit we're going to have with her. That was very clear as a part of our joining at that time. And so I had the opportunity to say goodbye in so many ways, and very much grieved in that moment as well. But there's truly nothing that can prepare you for like the actual news that a loved one has passed.
You're right.
And so it was traumatic.
Yeah, of course. And I also can't help, we didn't sort of get to this, but sort of going backwards, did you ever get the opportunity to come out to her? Is that something that you decided to do, or, you know, given the circumstances? I was curious, you know, in terms of whether you came out to her or not, and also your father, and where that kind of fell in the midst of all this sort of chaos going on in your life.
No, I think, you know, I thought about it long and hard as to whether or not that was something I wanted to do once I found out about her terminal illness. And, you know, it became very clear early on that the cancer, it was really kind of deprived my mom of her mental faculties. And so I just decided, you know, this is a stress that my family's got going on. And I know I am very fortunate in that there was never a doubt in my mind that my parents would love me, support me, stand by me, accept me no matter what. So, you know, at a certain point in time, it's like, the coming out experience at that point felt like it was more selfish for me than it was necessary for her. And so I never did come out to my mom. I was able to come out to my dad pretty shortly. I think within 6 months after my mom's passing, I come out to my dad. And so I didn't come out to her. There were moments where I felt like, am I like not being honest with her? But, you know, as so many parents later they'll tell you, parents always know what's going on in their children's lives.
Right.
Parents of LGBTQ kids, they always know their kid may be different in some way. They may not be able to exactly describe it, right? But they have a sense.
Moms know things.
Absolutely. Moms pay attention. They know what's going on. And so I never felt guilty about that choice. I felt like it was the right choice for my family in the moment. It's like, this is all the attention and energy needed to focus on my mom. And
absolutely. Yeah, no, I think, you know, you've got to do, one has to do what is right for that yourself in that moment. And you've got to, if there's some self-preservation in terms of, I know you shared with me that as the cancer spread to her brain, you know, she was not remembering things, and there's this idea of having to keep telling her that you're gay and and then be reminded when she asks,
like,
you know,
the fear of, I think the fear of any person coming out of like, how many times do I have to have this conversation with one person, right?
Yeah, because it's exhausting.
So it's exhausting. You have to prep yourself. You have to get that energy up, get the endorphins flowing to be able to have like that fight or flight experience as you're having the conversation of like, I'm not going to go through this over and over again, especially if it's not going to materially impact these final moments that we have with her. Exactly.
And like you said before, you know, it was sort of preserving the kind of interaction that you had with her. And also it was like for both her and for you, kind of self-preservation. And then also like my mother and my parent, you know, my dad is going through enough right now. Like, I'm not going to throw this on top of it. You know, I'm losing my mom and he's losing his wife. Well,
absolutely.
You know, you bounced back beautifully from that experience, from an outsider looking in. Okay. Like I talk to lawyers all day, every day. And if I had $1, Jonathan, for every young attorney or not so young attorney who wanted to go in-house, I probably could retire right now because this is like, you know, to make partner or to go in-house and be sort of practicing at sort of the highest levels of, you know, a legal department is like the golden goose of the legal profession. And so tell me a bit about, like, I know, again, once it's instantaneous, you didn't click your fingers and suddenly become a VP at Global Payments, but walk me through that experience, sort of the immediate aftermath, kind of how you got through the next year, you know, the rest of law school, and then kind of the aftermath.
Yeah, no, I think for a good long while, I just went into autopilot, right? I think anybody that experiences trauma knows that there's a period of time in which you're dealing with the trauma in the back of your mind, and in the front of your mind is like, let me put one foot in front of the other and just keep it going.
Yes.
And I was extraordinarily fortunate to have classmates that were understanding and supportive, to have professors and administration at Stanford, they were understanding and very supportive. I think that, if you're happy with your law school choice, there's something about that law school other than, what rank they have in the year before, what their graduation rate is, what their employment rate is. There's something else about that law school that you chose that really matters. And for me, I think I chose Stanford because it felt like a very humane place to go to school, to go to law school especially. And that was true 1,000 times over in my mom's passing. So I felt very fortunate in that way. Because I was able to go into autopilot, and I had a support community that kept me going. But then I think what I learned from that experience is, resiliency is just such a critical part of the legal profession. I think to be a successful lawyer requires you to be resilient, whether it's the loss of emotion, the loss of feeling like your deposition didn't go as well, the loss of a client, the loss of a case. Like, there's going to be losses as part of your career no matter what. And how you respond and how you react is 95% of success in this career. And my mom's passing kind of gave me some of that, an early lesson in how to be resilient, right? That it was, without a doubt, the most traumatic experience of my life and the most difficult thing to have to get through, but I survived it, Did I survive it intact? Not all the way right away, right? It took some time to kind of put all the pieces back together. But I think, the resiliency that I was able to demonstrate to myself in processing through that loss was really kind of foundational for how I handled the rest of my career. I've been fortunate. I haven't had terrible losses in my career, terrible setbacks, but when I do have them, I think there's a confidence of knowing, an old phrase that's oft repeated, but this too shall pass. Very much was the lesson that I learned in my mom's passing. And I think that served me very well in my career.
Yeah. When psychologists or counselors or sociologists study resilience, one thing they talk about, and something you hit on here, is kind of having a support group, which you did a beautiful job of creating for yourself, whether you knew that's what you were doing, innately, or whether it was sort of this very conscious thing or, subconscious thing. You did that. Another thing they point to in terms of people who are resilient and get through really difficult things, whether that be, health issues or job loss or earthquakes or whatever, is this idea that they had some practice, either they themselves or they had exemplary, they had people in their lives who showed them this is how you get through the tough stuff. And I was curious, when you sort of kind of look back on getting through just the tumult that you were going through during law school and everything that was going on, what comes to mind in terms of either experiences or people who kind of showed you how to do that?
I think it's funny. I think I've been fortunate to have lots of great examples of resilient people in my life, but I think one of the ones that I always turn to is my paternal grandmother, my dad's mom. She is without a doubt, not to be the stereotypical Black family that, that big mama's house scene where it is that grandmother that is the central force in the family. But my grandmother is very much that woman. And my dad's sister passed away in her 20s from cancer. And I know that was a very difficult experience for my entire dad's family. But my grandmother, day after day after day, she is just so strong, so assured. She is centered by her faith. She is just we may differ in how we are centered, but seeing that kind of example of just steadfastness of we can get through anything as long as you have that family and the friend group and that support system was such a key example in my life that I didn't realize until later in life how much of an example it was, but it is without question just one of those forces in your life that just teaches you lessons at every moment without you realizing it's happening.
Yes.
And I think
that's the funny thing, right? you don't know it's happening, and then you look back on it as an older, wiser person and go, oh, yeah, like I was being taught whether I knew it at the time. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, the funny thing is, she and my grandfather had moved in with my parents right before my mom had passed. They had been staying there for extended periods of time. And so she was there with my dad, holding his hand as my mom passed away. And I remember walking back into the house after flying back when my mom passed, and she was right there. She was just like, this is tough, but you guys lean on each other and we will get through this. And I kind of replayed that moment over and over again over the next year to year and a half as I was trying to figure out how to get through it. It's just like, lean on my dad and my brother, and we will get through this, and we will all be better in the end for it.
Yeah, definitely. You said, and you've told me this, and you said it in the podcast today, that, for the first year you were on autopilot, so to speak, sort of, you tamp down the emotions because you got stuff to do, right? We don't have time to sort of reflect and cry, or we do it for 5 seconds and then we move on to, how am I going to get a job after law school and finishing my finals, doing whatever else that you're trying to do. What kind of got you out of that? Like, you can only do that for so long, right? You and I know this, like, it becomes dangerous to push the emotions down indefinitely. One can't do that and function well. And it's not something that we as a society talk about. Mental health is kind of still, a little bit of a faux pas. You don't talk about it in good company and mixed company, right? But it's starting to sort of come out of the darkness and have some legitimacy and not be this thing that gets whispered about. But the reality of the matter is, when you come through something so traumatic, at some point you got to actually deal with it. You got to deal with the feeling.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how that manifested for you.
Yeah, no, funny enough, I was on autopilot for so long. One of my closest friends in law school said to me at about a year in, like, where have you gone? The person I became friends with is not present right now. Are you okay? You've gone through a traumatic thing, but you haven't talked about it. And it doesn't seem like you've worked through it, and it seems like you've shut down. And so, not surprisingly, yet another woman in my life willing to push me to really kind of understand and confront whatever I'm going through and be able to talk about it in a safe space and in a safe way, and say, like, I cannot let this experience control me and prevent me from being who I am. And so it was a tough conversation to have, very much, not like a movie scene, but very much like somebody just absolutely telling you all the things you don't want to hear in a moment in one conversation, but that are absolutely the things you have to hear in that moment. And I think what that taught me is, like you said, you have we develop these support systems around us, and the importance of relying on them in the moments of need. And as I look back on the rest of my legal career, my personal life as well, at every single place that I've worked, you find those people where you can be your full self, and you can join in the celebrations together and commiserate the downtimes together. And those kinds of people at every place in your career are just so critical to kind of maintaining some sort of health and sanity about the practice.
Definitely. Yeah. You can't just have your head down churning out briefs without, this is why networking is so important. This is why bringing your true, full, honest self to work is important. The network can be both in firm and out of firm. It can be from college or law school or wherever, but you got to have your people.
You got to have your people. And I think there's something to, I very much have my people outside of work, but I think there is something really critical about having that group of people that understand the nature of our profession. And somebody that really understands what it's like when you want to complain about how am I going to meet my billable hour requirements this month, this year, whatever. How am I going to manage to write these 5 briefs in 1 week's time. And people
Yes.
understanding what is the stress involved in that.
Yes.
And I'm super fortunate that I've got one of my best friends is a lawyer. She's never practiced with me, but she understands what being a lawyer is like, and we can vent together all the time. And then I have lots of friends at each of my places of work that understand that, whether they were my peers, my supervisors, that understand where you realize I can trust in this person, and sometimes you just need to walk into somebody's office, close the door, and complain and let it out,
Yes.
so that you can
Yes.
get back up and do the work.
That's right. That's right. And be human for a minute, and not just a marching lawyer. Well, let's talk about your your sort of path. We've
Sure.
You've mentioned to me that everything that happened at law school sort of altered your worldview in the sense that, you kind of let go of the need for prestige in your life and how that impacted your choices going forward, which then led to your current role. Would you shed some light on that and kind of how it's affected your career post law school?
Yeah, I think, we all, I'm sure we've all read lots of literature about it, right? Most people going to law school are used to being high achievers. In whatever circle they grew up in, they were the top of the class, cream of the crop, whatever it may be. And we all have that moment, whether it's before law school, in law school, or once you get into practice, where we have to confront and say, oh, there are a lot of people a lot smarter, a lot better, or a lot more likely to succeed than I. And there's always a question like, how do you respond to that?
Yes.
And in my mom's passing, she dedicated herself to her career, and but like worked terribly long hours that probably weren't the most conducive to kind of building up an immune system that could withstand a major illness like cancer, right? And there's no autopsy to tell me that I'm right, but I wouldn't be surprised if somebody told my mom kind of worked herself to death, right? Because she was so committed to the excellence of her work. And in that, I think my brother and I talked about this. We both decided, like, I want to be successful, and I'm going to be successful no matter what, but I'm definitely not going to turn my life over to my work. I'm not going to work so much that I am unhealthy and that I am sacrificing a life worth living, a well-lived life, for work. And so I think, there are several points in my career of where, whether it's a firm that wasn't a match for me, or that ultimate decision that being at a firm was not what I wanted to do, and making that move in-house, where I had to really confront, what am I doing right now in my profession, and what is the trajectory for me, and is that going to lead to that healthy, happy life? It sounds so corny to say it, but it's real, I don't want to be part of the statistics of self-harm or abusive coping mechanisms. That's not the path that I want to go down for my life. And so once I get to a place where I realize that what I'm doing and the practice that I have in front of me is not a healthy one, got to make a change, make the choice to move, because even if it's a quote-unquote more successful one, the success is not worth it.
Yeah, you mentioned to me before, like, you started at a firm in Atlanta, and, wasn't the right fit. And, there were some legitimate concerns. And I counsel some of my candidates about this, about, being too jumpy, so to speak, leaving a firm too soon, even though you're not happy. And you ultimately sort of made the decision to say, life's too short. Like, I don't care, if there may be fallout for this, for kind of having too many firms on my resume in such a short period of time, but I'm going to do it anyway. And, I applaud you for doing that, because, life's too short to be miserable, for the rest of our life.
And like you said, we spend so much time focusing on the resumes and the processes and, like, all the achievements. And you're worried, like, is this going to look bad on my resume? And ultimately, like, you got to stop living for the resume. And I think that's where I've had the most happiness in my career is when I made choices where I was not living for the resume, but living for, a job and a career path that I was happy with.
Absolutely. Well, we've got a few more minutes here, and I want to hit one last thing. 2020 has been a difficult year for a lot of people, especially young, newly practicing attorneys. Many of them have been furloughed, laid off, pay cuts, uncertainty about their hours and the future of their careers. And not to mention, of course, like upheaval in their personal lives. Freudian slip there. And many of them, especially like the millennials and the Gen Xers, were too young to really be impacted professionally during the Great Recession. So it's the first time in their adult lives that they're dealing with this level of just stress from all angles and, this career uncertainty. What advice would you give to these young lawyers?
I think the advice I would always give to young lawyers is to exercise patience. I think patience is a key part of resiliency, right? I think when I look at some of my colleagues that really got harmed in the Great Recession, because I graduated in 2008. And so my class was the class where we showed up in August and jobs were not available at all. Jobs were not available for 6 months. Whatever you got hired, what practice group you got hired into, it no longer existed at that firm. So pivot, right? There were a lot of things that were really hard on my classmates. And what I universally have seen are those that, I think those that were able to exercise the patience to say, what I'm doing right now may not be ideal, but if I keep doing a good job at it, what comes next will sustain me. I think those are ones that are thriving. One of the trademark friends, right? She got laid off from her firm before she even started, and she's now general counsel of a major sports team here in the U.S. Right? And that kind of resiliency only comes with a certain degree of patience to know that, like, if I'm certain of my path and I'm willing to do the work it takes to stay on it, I will be able to succeed eventually.
Thank you for listening to Bouncing Back, Resilience for Lawyers. Join us next time for another story about thriving after overcoming challenges. You can find Bouncing Back and other programming for lawyers on MLA's Legal Talk Network.